The Kaiserreich political authority.
I'm A.
And I'm M.
German Empire, 1871. There was no single state of Germany before 1871. The First Reich was 300 different German states grouped together under the Holy Roman Empire. Prussia was the largest state in Germany in 1871.
1. This empire was destroyed under the French Emperor Napoleon in 1806. Following his defeat in 1815, 39 new states were established by the Congress of Vienna to provide stability. Instead, it invoked competition for influence over the states.
Prussia was the most influential. They played a major role in the defeat of the French and acquired land in the Rhineland. 1862 took Prussia to war against Austria. This forged the North German Confederation in 1867, which gave Prussia control over most of the states in Germany. The German Kaiser Wilhelm I was Prussian and was made Kaiser in 1871. His newly unified Germany was the Kaiserreich or the Second Reich. 18th of January 1871, Wilhelm was proclaimed German Kaiser in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles near Paris in France.
3. Germany, however, was still not fully united. Not all states spoke German, so wouldn't see themselves as German. Out of the new 26 states, 22 had a monarchy. Prussia comprised 60% of Germany. Bavaria had its own army, and Germany was a federal state. It included French-speaking Alsace-Lorraine in the west, Danish minority in the north, and Polish-speaking areas in East Prussia. This would have created some divisions from different views, lack of belonging, etc.
A new constitution was needed to define how the newly unified Reich would be ruled and clarify the powers of the Kaiser. German liberals wanted a democratic constitution to give people control over their own government. They wanted an elected parliament. The liberals supported Bismarck, even though he was a Prussian conservative. This is because they felt they were united in aims and he was a liberal. They had the shared aim of uniting Germany. Some people argue this was undemocratic because Bismarck had most of the power that Wilhelm gave him.
But Bismarck was not a liberal, he was a Junker. His views were conservatives, commitment to the authoritarian Prussian tradition. He was suspicious of people power and instead wanted to use the liberals to create his ideal unified Germany, which was not democratic.
The Constitution of 1871. This was virtually the same one that Bismarck had devised for the North German Confederation in 1867. It consisted of
1. The Kaiser. He was a hereditary monarch and king of Prussia. He appointed and dismissed the Chancellor and other ministers. He could dissolve and call the Reichstag. He commanded the army directly and controlled foreign policy. He gave assent to all the laws and devised policies and laws with his Chancellor and Bundesrat. He had the final say in disputes over constitution. Task: define what autocratic means and define what democratic means.
2. Government. Chancellor and ministers were appointed and dismissed by the Kaiser and responsible only to him. They decided outlines of policy with the Kaiser, Bundesrat, and the Chancellor and Kaiser gave assent to all laws.
3. Reichstag, Parliament. They were members elected by males over 25 years. The member had right to free speech. Elections were held every 3 years. Members gave consent to all laws. They could question and debate, agree and reject a law proposed by the Chancellor. They could not amend a law, however, and they could also not demand the dismissal of the Chancellor or any other ministers. Task: what parts of the Reichstag are democratic?
Bundesrat. 58 representatives of the 25 states, in proportion to the size of the states, were presided over by the Chancellor and initiated legislation. Decisions decided by majority vote, except for decisions to alter the constitution, which needed a majority of 14. They had to approve new laws and they could veto legislation, except for budget, which was the Reichstag's responsibility. They gave approval to the Kaiser for the declaration of war. Task: what problem would proportional representation have? Think about how big Prussia is and majority.
This is the diagram of the 1871 Constitution. Task: draw your own diagram to help you remember the 1871 Constitution.
The German Empire in 1871. 3 ways the Kaiser was powerful. They controlled foreign policy, could declare war and make peace, and had final says over dispute about the constitution. 3 ways Bismarck, the Chancellor, was powerful. He was chief minister of government, responsible to the Emperor, not the Reichstag, was appointed and dismissed other ministers in the government, could ignore views of the Reichstag. 3 ways the Reichstag was democratic. All men over the age of 25 had the right to vote, universal male suffrage, could approve or reject budgets, made of representatives from political parties, which was elected every 5 years.
How democratic was the German Empire, the Kaiserreich? Democratic. All men over the age of 25 had the right to vote, universal male suffrage. However, most working class didn't vote because they weren't familiar with democracy and didn't understand. 2. The Reichstag made of representatives from political parties, which were elected every 5 years. However, the Kaiser could call a vote himself. 3. Passes or rejects bills. Again, Bismarck could ignore. Autocratic. Prussia dominated the new Reich, 60% of Germany's population, 2/3 of land, and dominated political, military, administrative structure. They could also block changes to constitution, and 17 members of the Bundesrat could veto laws. Bismarck, he could ignore the views of the Reichstag and appointed/dismissed other ministers in the government and dominated secretaries of state. The Kaiser, he was hereditary and could declare war/bring peace, and he controlled foreign policy and chose the Chancellor and could dismiss this Chancellor at any point.
Roles of the Emperor and Chancellor. The new constitution demanded an able Chancellor and Kaiser who could work together. This balance was partly reached with Otto von Bismarck and Kaiser Wilhelm.
Bismarck. Bismarck was Chancellor, PM, and Foreign Minister of Prussia, and essentially held the voice of Emperor, as Kaiser Wilhelm, aged 74, was happy to have a passive role and leave the governing of Germany to Bismarck. He exploited his reputation as the man who united Germany and had vast influence over the Kaiser. He was conservative and proud of Prussia's military tradition and wanted to rule Germany in an authoritarian way. He was anxious for political power to remain in traditional hands. 2. Bismarck's relationship with the Reichstag. Regarded it with disdain, disliked democracy. If the Reichstag deputies voiced criticisms, he sought the Kaiser's support to dissolve the House and hold a new election to increase his support in the Reichstag. 3. Kaiser Wilhelm. He was very dependent on Bismarck and was desperate to keep him as he governed well. Bismarck could usually get what he wanted by threatening to resign. Wilhelm I died at age 91 in 1888, and as Bismarck was ultimately answerable to the Kaiser, he lost his power as he didn't get along with Wilhelm II. Political groupings, parties, and ideologies. The new constitution allowed parliamentary elections and representation, which encouraged the development of a range of political parties. They didn't compete for the right to rule the country. They were more like pressure groups who represented the interests of certain groups in society. The National Liberals, left-wing, they supported German unification, favoured free trade, a strong Germany, and had a want for a constitutional liberal state. In 1875, they became more conservative as it felt threatened by the growth of the SPD. They gained support from the Protestant middle class, the wealthy and educated men. 2. The Zentrum, the Centre Party, right wing. They were determined to preserve the position of the Catholic Church, especially in education. They were conservative in its support for the Constitution and favour for greater centralisation. The Zentrum Party was liberal in its attitude to social reform. They gained support from German Catholics, minorities opposed to Bismarck, people in Bavaria and the Rhineland.
The SPD, Social Democratic Party, left wing. They supported the reduction in the power of the elites and extension of welfare reforms. Extreme members wanted an overthrow of the constitution and the establishment of a republic, but most wanted to work with the existing system to bring better conditions to the masses. It was supported by the working class and trade unions.
4. DKP, German Conservative Party, who were right-wing. They disliked the Reichstag because it was elected by an electorate. They were supported by Protestant aristocrats and Prussian Junker landowners. They dominated the Prussian Landtag land government, elected under a 3-stage system.
FKP, Free Conservatives, right wing. Strong supporters of Bismarck and was supported by landowners, industrialists and businessmen, and its geographic base was wider than the DKP.
6. DFP, Progressives, left wing. They believed in a liberal constitutional state. They disliked centralism and militarism, and as they were not supportive of Bismarck. They wanted to extend powers of the Reichstag. They were supported by Protestant middle classes. Task: put these political parties on a political spectrum.
That's it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.